Hi everyone, welcome to March AMA edition. This time we're going to talk about Salesforce hosted MCP servers, and I am here with Ross Belmont, who is a product manager on the integration space. Hello, Ross.
Hey, how's everybody doing today?
We are lucky to have you here. And with that, I want to start by sharing our forward looking statement slide, which just means that users make purchasing decisions based on features that are GA. Today, we're going to cover some features that are not yet GA, but that we hope will become GA very soon. And I want to remind you to join our developer community where you can ask questions asynchronously, not only about this topic, but about any topics that are of your interest and that developer advocates, product managers, and other fellow developers can help you with. Also, know that we have a series of Agentforce Now events happening right now in different time zones that you can register to. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because our amazing Ross is going to give you a quick introduction to Salesforce MCP servers, hosted MCP servers, and how they can be used by developers today. So, Ross,
Yeah.
happy to stop sharing. Oh, sorry, we said
Yeah,
we
you
just
can continue
agreed that
with
I'm
it.
going to advance the slides.
Yeah,
So let's do that.
great. Yeah, so we're talking in general today about agentic interoperability, and there actually have been some other recent AMAs, I think, on effectively the same topic, just different parts of it, because there's definitely multiple aspects to it. So if we advance the next slide, there's a lot going on in the world of agentic interop here at Salesforce. We've got a lot of irons in the fire and things in motion. You've probably heard about the MCP client when it comes to Agentforce, right? Other multi-agent orchestration, A to A is on the horizon as well. So there's a lot happening, and we're just going to focus in on MCP servers today for the sake of this conversation. So we can advance here. So we're just going to talk MCP. We're just going to talk more specifically about the right hand side of this screen, right? Just so that everybody understands, this is a basic question that we sometimes get in a lot of different forums. That Agentforce is and will be an MCP client, right? Enabling Agentforce to call out to external systems and APIs using the MCP protocol. But also, Salesforce will act as an MCP server so that external agents can call into Salesforce as well. So we're going to talk about the right-hand side of the screen today and sort of get into that in more depth. So we can move forward on the slides. And here we go. All right. So the hosted MCP servers offering is unique and advantageous for a few reasons. These are the messages we sort of want to leave you with. That it's a fully managed infrastructure, just like what you're used to with our REST APIs, SOAP, bulk, things like that. You're not managing the servers and their uptime, right? All the platform security that you're used to is built in. So, CRUD, FLS sharing, all that good stuff that you've already got set up for all your users in production today, and all those tools and tricks that you know how to use, and role hierarchy, queues, all those things are brought to bear here as well to have strong security even in this agentic era. And then not only are we secure and capable and scalable, it's also extensible for you to be able to build your own capabilities on top of what we're providing out of the box. Bring your own Apex actions, bring your own flows, things like that, which we'll get into in more detail here in a second. So overall, if you're familiar with the world of MCP sort of has these three buckets of functionality that servers like ours prepare to offer to the agents that are connecting to the server, right? There's tools, prompts, and resources, and there's different levels of coverage for each of those at this time, and each one sort of does a different thing, right? In terms of tools, you can think of this as sort of mapping and wrapping existing APIs. And out of box, or in our GA release, we're going to have capabilities for Data Cloud SQL, as well as S-Object APIs, data access and visualization also through Tableau Next. And then in the business process side, we've got things like Apex actions and flows. There's also some access to metadata and some miscellaneous other types of capabilities that we're exposing as tools. Then the prompts primitive is an interesting one that some but not all clients, MCP clients, support. This allows us to use Flex templates to find and prompt builder to guide what the MCP client's going to do. You could basically think of it as, instead of having the user type in a long prompt and be effective at prompt engineering, the prompt template can just define that for them, and then it gets run in the client and can follow a longer and more specific set of instructions for better accuracy. Resources is something that you can think of a little bit like attachments, and the initial use of that is interesting from a scale perspective. But what you are actually now seeing already, if you've been following very closely, is that resources are used so that these servers can actually project out rich UI in the middle of a conversational chatbot experience. So in terms of if you're using Slack, then you might be familiar with how the cards and work objects render in Slack. It's kind of like that, but even inside of like a ChatGPT or a Claude. So it's interesting. It's an interesting use of resources, and there will be others as we move forward. So let's keep going. Just want to talk a little bit about security because security is so important, right? You're used to this pattern when it comes to accessing our APIs, right? Your REST client that you as a developer are building or using is identified by an external client app, which governs how it accesses the org. And then that you make your way to the actual REST API entry point that we manage, on the framework level, before routing to the actual target resource API, whichever one you've chosen, right? The same basically applies to MCP. So you can put the next pieces on the screen here, and the MCP client, right? It acts similarly to a REST client, still governed and controlled by settings in an external client app. And then if we advance further, we see that what we're doing is just that middle piece is the new hosted MCP server entry point before then the request is backed by the target resource API. So this helps understand how and why all the existing CRUD, FLS, etc. controls apply, because they apply the same way as if you would have hit those same APIs over REST for that user. The external client app also has the settings that define the fact that per user OAuth is the only supported mechanism right now. So there's always a human in the loop, or as I like to say, at the wheel. So you know who's taking the action. Now, that having been said, there is interest in limiting further what these agents can do, even though someone's got their hands on the wheel, right? Like even though you've got your profiles and permission sets set up in your org, and a user can do X, Y, and Z in the org, you may want the external AI client to do even less than that on their behalf. Well, there's a couple of strategies to think about if that's what you want to do, right? First of all, we have a read-only MCP server that can't change or delete any data. That's an easy way to go. Second of all, you can control exactly what SOCL queries are going to be powered by given MCP tools using named queries, which are a newer structure that we have as an extension to our API stack now that allows you to define a fixed SOCL statement, and that can be what's behind a given MCP server, right? Or sorry, MCP tool. And then it can access only that data. And then finally, as I've alluded to a couple of times, you can just build your own tool completely. Maybe you have a more complicated sort of pseudo sharing structure broken out. I've talked to some customers already have that. They have like red, yellow, green, like risk levels on certain records, and that's not cleanly represented maybe in the sharing model, but you can have code that represents that, so that you can manage it through code and control exactly what goes out. Okay, moving on. So I don't want to burn too much of our time with the slideware, right? We're 10 minutes in and we try to keep this part tight. I could say more. I don't want this to turn into a lecture. And now I think it's time for our questions.
Okay. So your questions. If you are watching us on YouTube or LinkedIn, start posting them because our team are helping to gather all those questions, and I'm going to be asking them to Ross one by one. So let me take a look at the questions that we already have here. And we have a first question that came through LinkedIn, and it's from Sally Elgul. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I hope so. Thank you, Sally, for asking this question. And the question is, so in Salesforce, we will create an external client app per external MCP client agent who wants to connect with our Salesforce org, correct?
Yes, I think that's a great way to think about it. The external client app, in my mind and in my existing demos, you would name it something like Claude, ChatGPT, etc. Right, and that represents that app's access to your org, right? And that can be uh, singular per org, right? I don't think strictly there's a need for more than one. I think you can avoid that in a given org, and then depending on your familiarity with how much you know about external client apps, there's a lot that you can do there in terms of using profiles, permission sets, etc., by way of I believe they call it the policies, to govern which users in that org can use that external client app. You might have something where, the engineering team is going to use Cursor, but, sales reps are going to use Claude, right? And you could have two separate external client apps that's representing the fact that both those apps have access, but you do something in the external client app config to link or tie that app to that profile permission set, like to identify and segment off those user communities that are going to be able to use those tools then.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Ross. So we have another question that came through LinkedIn. This time is from Scott. And the question is, can the hosted MCP servers use or replace all the standard Salesforce REST endpoints?
So at this point, there are an awful lot of REST endpoints, right? If you take a look at the reference doc and the API documentation, if you actually count them up, you'll see a few thousand, right? And at this point, there are not thousands of API or MCP servers and API tools that we have on offer, right? There are some key building blocks that are a good place to start, but definitely more will be coming in the future. So it's not the case now that everything that's a REST API is automatically an MCP tool. That will be growing over time. If you needed something specific, right, there are APIs in the catalog that are available. Not all APIs are yet cataloged, but that's a journey we're on as well, right? So that is one way to think about it. And then if there's availability to that functionality, again, you may choose to, in the meantime, bridge across using an Apex action or similar to reach that API, use it and send the results back through an MCP tool. Oh, hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you, Ross. I'm going to take advantage of this moment to show you a QR code from which you can reach the open beta wiki page in case that you want to take a look at some more documentation about the topic. And there's also a help page that you can scan and take a look at. So the next question came from YouTube, from Lunatic Course, I think. And the question is about the API request limit. So beta was consuming just API request limits. Now with the GA, how is the pricing and rate limit going to change?
The intent there is to keep that the same and to have this functionality be included with additions that support the API already. So, as developers, you probably understand that there's APIs behind these things. So APIs are needed to actually power what we're talking about. So that'll stay consistent for the current and foreseeable future. And if there's any change to that, it's something that we would announce as, part of regular release notes, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And the next question is also from Scott. Well, another Scott, I believe, in LinkedIn than before, different from before. And the question is, will this feature be available for production environments?
Yes, it is our intent to bring this to you at TDX. We're really excited to um, repeat some of these messages again in a few weeks on stage in San Francisco and on Salesforce Plus. So if you're at home and you're not joining us and I won't be able to see you live in the room, please join us on Salesforce Plus as well. But that is our intent, and we're right there at the finish line.
Which leads me to show another QR code because this feature is also available in Scratch orgs, right?
Yes, you can use. So today's open beta, right? So if you're a developer, as you know, here we are in a developer-oriented AMA, right? Do want to make it clear that we're an open beta now. You can turn this on in Sandbox, Scratch, and developer orgs. The only trick related to Scratch orgs is that it's trickier to create or get an external client app into a Scratch org. There's other documentation about that, right? In terms of how you can use your dev hub and packages or other command line capabilities to get that external client app set up in the Scratch org. It's a separate, issue unrelated to sort of MCP itself. But the MCP service works in those three today. So if you're trying to get your hands on it to see how it works and see what you'll be, capable of doing and to try whatever you want to try to build on top of it, no reason not to try that now.
Great. Thank you, Ross. Then we have another question from Sally. And the question is regarding Apex and how do you expose it to the Salesforce MCP server? If it is regular Apex or if it must be Apex REST, such as web service definition.
Gotcha. Yes. You have a couple options. Apex REST is one of them. I didn't specifically mention that, so it's just good to call out the specific options. I did mention name query, right? But then you've got Apex REST, and then there's also sort of the invocable methods, right? That you've probably used to if you've built an Apex action for Flow. That's also an option, right? Those don't have to be REST APIs. They can be just those kinds of actions as well. And then they'll also be Aura enabled. So the different possibilities where you may have code already, or where you might then choose to invest now where you don't have code today, right? I think it's attractive to be thinking about invocable actions because then they can be used in Agentforce configurations, be used in Flow, multiple places.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Then we have another question from Santaji, but I think it's related to Agentforce vibes specifically and token limit.
Okay.
Santaji, I recommend you to post your question on the Trailblazer community so we can tag the product manager that can help you with that because this AMA today is specifically about Salesforce hosted MCP servers. Okay, and then there is another question from Babak on LinkedIn, and the question is, what are the MCP server limits?
Sure. Yeah. So right now, if you're thinking about the execution side limits, again, we touched briefly on the fact that this does tie back to API, right? So that is in play as it would be if you were calling APIs over REST. Right now, we also have some high-end limits designed for what we call service protection at the pod level. Just 20,000 per pod per minute. We don't anticipate customers to hit that yet, and we may be sharpening up our statements on that and even post GA to make it more clear, or if we feel like we need to have more limits beyond what the APIs already have. So I hope that makes sense. But currently, since we're borrowing, quite a bit from the API frameworks, we do have quite a bit of scale.
Okay, understood. Fantastic. So the next question is from Romulo Coimbra on LinkedIn. And the question is there a repository of MCPs curated by Salesforce that are useful for Salesforce developers?
Sure. I guess there's two answers to that question. The one is that I think you may have flashed up. Yeah, you've got the QR code on screen right now that has the wiki for the current open beta, and on there you will see the list of MCP servers that are on offer here at this moment. Um, you'll see again, like I said, S objects, Data Cloud, Tableau. I mentioned those. But to be real specific on your question, depending on how I interpret it, if you are a developer and you're trying to build a Salesforce app, right, and that's your goal, and you're trying to write Apex and build WCs and things like that, for that you definitely should look at Agentforce vibes, because the mixture of the CLI and DX tools, etc., are all baked in to that experience out of box already, and you may not need to um, have any worry about anything over and above that, because that team's done a good job of sort of baking that all in as an out of box experience for developers. You may want to think about what we're offering here on the hosted or remote MCP server side as, again, more akin to how we offer APIs, which you're thinking about including in your solutions that are runtime integrations.
Okay, thank you. So keep your questions coming in. We have a lot of questions in the queue at the moment. This is going very, very well. I love to see all these questions coming. And the next question is from Christopher Easter. And the question is, so you should start with MCP and extend custom as needed, right? What is the architectural approach for this going forward?
Yeah, I think I get the question. So I would make an analogy to how you would approach building any other kind of app or solution in Salesforce today, where you would, want to lean on what's there out of box as much as possible and minimize your own code maintenance burden, right? I mean, why would you not want to do that? So I think getting the most out of the default servers and tools is obviously great, and then only when you need to go above and beyond is it something where you need to invest maybe in making custom tools. The only other way to think about it is that I do know and have heard feedback from folks that are still experimenting and, as I mentioned before, trying to limit down what AI clients have access to, and maybe start extremely simply with one or two tools that do one or two basic things. And if you wanted to do that, and on your experimentation journey and your sandbox, etc., just to get comfortable and get your leadership buy-in, that's fine as well. And you may choose to make custom tools for that. But we're not necessarily advocating that you have to, just because we would not rather you have a code maintenance burden where you don't strictly need one. But it's, again, similar to standard and custom objects in a way. Right? There are standard servers, there are standard objects, there are custom objects and custom servers. Would you make all custom objects and try to replace lead and account and opportunity? That's probably not a good idea, right? So that same type of judgment would be brought to bear.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, Ross. So we have one more question from Sally. It's, I think, a follow-up question to the previous one. And the question is, we will always still need the REST APIs whenever an external system needs to be integrated to our org, not an agent, but a regular external system. Or that would be replaced with MCP servers as well.
Oh, I see your point. Yeah. I don't think I would choose to use the MCP service unless the calling app had an LLM behind it or underneath it, right? Because then it's a layer that I don't know that you really need, right? And it's a path that's being paved for this new style of client, right? Now, as more and more clients and pieces of software in general get LLM enabled, we may be in a world sooner than later where all software has some level of AI embedded into it. We might even be at a place in a year or two where software that doesn't have AI embedded into it feels broken. So we'll see what happens over time. But if you just have some existing app today that connects over REST, and that's all working fine, we're not here to send the message that you need to tear that down and rebuild it on MCP. That's not what this is about. This is about a new generation of clients, and external apps that are AI enhanced.
Great. Thank you, Ross. And the next question is from Bani Brada. The question is, do we have a list of the Salesforce hosted MCP servers? And I think we already shared this, right? The list, you can find it in the open beta wiki QR code that you can see on the screen right now. Maybe, Ross, you want to call out some of the servers that are available?
Sure. Yeah. So the S-Objects is obviously very popular and a great way to start your experimentation. Where we have read-only plus, servers that include tools to mutate, insert, delete, right? Depending on, again, your comfort level. Then there's Data Cloud has a lot of interest, especially in marketing analysis use cases. Heard some really interesting use cases there. We're trying to analyze buying trends, things like that. Also, Tableau is in that same space, right? Tableau, with Tableau Next, with the semantic layer on top of your data from theoretically anywhere, right? You're asking natural language questions on top of those data sets. That's really powerful. And let's see, then there are, other line item examples that you'll see in ones added over time in industries and things like that. We've had interest from a lot of different parts of the company. Like maybe there's insurance, and maybe CPQ, Revenue Cloud. I think that those will fill in over time.
Thank you. So the next question is about agents interoperability. And the question is from Faris or Faris. Do the tools exposed through a Salesforce hosted MCP server include Agentforce actions? In an enterprise that already uses Agentforce, what is the recommended pattern for an external agent platform to interoperate with those existing Agentforce actions and workflows?
Yeah, dynamite question. So we're collaborating closely with the Agentforce team on making that exact thing possible, and we're looking forward to that being in pilot soon. And what that would look like is that there's an MCP tool that's a custom tool and a custom server that is aligned with a specific Agentforce agent, and then invoking that tool is sending work to that agent and sending an utterance that it is then going to work on and respond to. Already hearing use cases from customers that already have sales and marketing agents, for example, that help to predict reordering and predict stock levels, things like that, like what are likely buyers, right? And you may just have users that don't happen to be inside the Lightning UI all day, but they can still leverage that capability by just sort of bridging and wrapping those existing agents through new MCP tools. So very excited to see that piece. It won't be GA as part of the overall GA of the hosted server capability, but you'll be hearing about it as this piece moves on.
Fantastic. So we have one more question, this time from Kostadin. And the question is if there will be a standard connector for cloud based on these MCPs, similar to what we have in Slack.
That's a possibility. It's a little bit TBD. You may have heard of the one that we have in ChatGPT that we released back in December. That's oriented towards sales use cases, and you may see something similar from the sales group with an equivalent capability. No specific timelines to communicate on that right now, but would not be shocked if that happens. Broadly, I would also say, though, that if you're a Claude user and a Claude shop, connecting to one of our out-of-box MCP servers or a custom server is relatively straightforward. So don't feel like you're blocked waiting for us to have an entry in their app directory, right? I think you can go succeed a lot sooner than that.
Okay, thank you, Ross. So I want to use this moment to share with you also a Salesforce Plus episode in which Ross gave a longer talk about this topic in case that you are interested of in watching it. It will be a little bit outdated, right? Because Reinforce was a few months ago, but not much. So take a look, and I think you will understand the features better if you take a look at the full episode, right, Ross?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of the same concepts here. Um, I think some updated additions here where we didn't have certain pieces ready yet, but great core concepts that will broadly still apply.
Fantastic. So the next question is from E2 Animus from YouTube. And this is, I love this question because it's the first question I had when I started to learn about this topic. So, what are the differences between Salesforce DX MCP server and Salesforce hosted MCP servers?
Sure. Yes. The easy answer is that the DXMCP server and Vibes toolset is meant for the developer persona to build Salesforce apps. That's probably a lot of you here today, right? And but so the next time you need to go, build some app, make LWCs, make flows, add custom objects, right? That's what you should be using. That's a tool set you should grab, and it's enhanced with agent skills and all sorts of great stuff to make your coding experience much more efficient, right? And take advantage of all the latest and greatest amazing stuff in AI, where AI is going to write that code for you. Uh, the hosted MCP server, you can think about as a style of connector, again analogous to our APIs that you use in integration scenarios, especially at runtime for business users. So you're not going to have any sales reps or marketers or customer service folks using DX command line tools or even tools like Cursor, probably, right? That's for developers. But there will be cases where you've got your sellers, you've got your service agents, you've got your marketers, you've got your commerce minded folks in chatbot experiences that need to interact with Salesforce, and this is how they would do that.
Yes, thank you, Rose. And I believe that the word hosted, it's really self-defining, right? Because the
Yes,
Salesforce DXMCP server is something that you run locally from your IDE.
that's
And
correct.
Salesforce hosted MCP servers are run by Salesforce.
Yeah, exactly. And some of those local uh, tools in the developer toolbox make sense in terms of how they're wrapping command line tools, for your metadata deploys and things like that, right? That's what that's for. That's a great thing for that to do. But in this case, it's similar to our REST SOAP and bulk APIs, where it's all hosted by us.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, it's really interesting. Is there a way to track whether developers are using MCP servers in LLMs integrations with Salesforce?
I think where you're going with this is that this is something that will show up in the API logs. So let's say that someone's in a chatbot like ChatGPT and they run a prompt that does a query to Salesforce and queries their assigned leads or something, right? Then they will, that activity will ultimately result in an API call behind the scenes to the leads, and querying API. And you'll be able to see in the API logs that the calling app was the hosted MCP service. So that's the most direct answer to that. If I think I'm following where you're going with that, to know what activity is happening that's sort of MCP sourced versus not. And it's also worth, just taking a second to mention, like, this is a great reason why, a good example of why we want you to use our hosted MCP service and not something else you could find open source or whatever that's that would just end up wrapping the existing REST APIs. When that happens, we can't tell a difference between traffic that's just regular REST API traffic and something that's truly agentic.
Great. So that question was from Viresh. Thank you, Viresh, for your question. And then we have another question from Joaquin, I believe. Are the custom MCP servers available in beta already?
Technically, yes. Yeah, there. Admittedly, I think there have been a couple of UI bugs in the setup of the custom servers where you go into a new area of setup and add those. But those are going to be solved either and certainly in the next few weeks. So don't be shocked if it's not quite perfect just yet, but it should be available for experimentation.
Great. Thank you for the question and for the response. And the next question is from Michelle Norton, and it's regarding SAP. What considerations are there for accessing the Salesforce MCP servers from SAP? SAP has said to me that it is unclear on the specifics.
That's interesting. I will have to admit that I am not sure whether or not SAP has a uh, functioning MCP client. If they did, it should work. There's not at this juncture anything we're doing special that I can see that would prevent that. So if SAP has a functioning MCP client that's spec adherent and can work with the auth mechanisms that we have, I would expect it to be able to connect.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the next question, it's from Wen Xiusong, Shousong. Okay, he already specified, or she already specified the pronunciation. Thank you for that. And the question is, when setting up the hosted MCP server, you will need to set up an external client app. After the external client app is created, each individual or has a consumer key and secret. Does this mean the external MCP client will need to accept a consumer key and a secret in order to authenticate?
Yes. The way that you're seeing the clients work today, when you set up the connection in, let's say, Claude or ChatGPT, and you go define the connector or the app, those apps use different language. You place the client ID and secret of the external client app into that client config. And then in those examples, they hold that information securely on their server side, if that makes sense. And then that identifies that specific connection in their multi-tenant environment, right? Because ChatGPT and Claude have many enterprise customers, just like we do. But your org can then know that it's that specific ChatGPT tenant that is accessing that specific org, right? So it's not unlike other scenarios where you've seen where you would move or paste those identifiers from the server side to the client side so that it knows how to present those credentials when connecting.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is from Chaitanya. Sorry, I'm super bad at namings and pronunciations, but I'm trying my best. I hope that you forgive me. Does MCP need Agentforce licensing in order to work? Or if this a separate add-on? For instance, if we intend to only use it with named query and Apex Apex REST.
Those two functionalities do not require an Agentforce related licensing. The piece that does, that I didn't get to mention before, was the use of prompts and prompt templates. Prompt templates are part of Agentforce broadly. So that piece requires some level of Agentforce licensing, but not the other pieces you just mentioned. As I said before, it's Enterprise Edition and above effectively at this point, which are the API enabled editions that include the MCP service.
Okay. And follow-up question from Lunaticors, which is uh, PKCE, proof key for
Yep.
code exchange, will be the option, or more options will come for authentication?
That's required now. I don't see us removing that option. I will say that the MCP clients today have a fairly limited set of auth options that they support. Effectively, the only methods that I've seen actually work at runtime is auth code under the auth code flow in OAuth with PKCE, which is probably good because that's the most secure option and puts us in a posture where, again, we know that there's that human at the wheel because each individual person logs in separately and individually. You auth in through Salesforce interactively in a browser. You click allow, and at that moment, the access token for you individually as a user goes back to your client in question, and then is used to authenticate each request that happens, just like with any other OAuth scenario.
Makes sense. Thank you, Ross. So the next question, I think we already addressed this. If is there a consumption cost for the customer associated with using the MCP server? This is a question from Faris.
That will depend on which sort of tool or capability you're accessing, right? So if you were to access a data cloud, right, or a query, or you invoke an Agentforce agent, then yes, right? If you run a prompt template, then yes. But if you do some of those other pieces we mentioned, Apex REST, name queries, etc., then no, because those retain the current licensing and monetization that they have today.
Fantastic. Okay, so one more question from Sally. Thank you so much for your thoughtful and intelligent questions, Sally. You are making this AMA very interesting and fun. Do you think it is required to know how to build MCP service from scratch, or Salesforce is removing this complexity from us, and we just need to work with the capabilities that you exposed in them?
Right, it's the latter. Yeah, we don't want you to have to build an entire MCP service that turns out to be trickier than you think it would be. So please don't do that. That's why I have my team working hard to make sure that you don't have to do that. We can do that for you, and you just need to decide whether or not you need custom tools and custom capabilities on top of what we're bringing out of the box. In the same way that you don't have to manage servers to build apps on the rest of Salesforce, right? You don't have to manage Tomcat, Jetty, Oracle, and all the things we have under the hood there, right? That's something we've got handled for you.
Thank you. And the next question is also from Sally and is regarding flows. If flows can be exposed as tool directly, and same for prompt templates executing Agentforce agents.
Let's take each one separately.
Yes.
On the flows, yes, though it's auto-launched flows, right? As you might be able to imagine, like screen flows aren't really practical at this point, at least not yet. So if the flow can run in the right sort of mode, then yeah, then that logic can execute, and that's fine. It takes its inputs and outputs and sort of runs in the background, so to speak, right? So it might not 100% of every flow that you have will be a choice, but in general, yes, flow is an option. The other question was prompt
Prompt
templates.
templates.
Yeah, prompt templates can execute a lot of things. I won't pretend to be an expert in everything that they can do, but they will run and then return the prompt to the client. So maybe I'm not totally sure where that question landed, but I hope that helps, because basically the idea is that we take the prompt template, we hydrate it, and then we send it back to the client, and the client runs that as its prompt. So there will be more on that in the future. I don't want to say too much about where that could go, but suffice to say, there's more that we could tap into that we're not fully taking advantage of today, with everything that prompt templates can do, because that's actually quite a robust tool set. and I'm actually excited about where that goes in the future.
Good. So next question is about security and permissions. How does MCP handle security and permissions when an AI agent performs an action in Salesforce?
Right. So this is the good news, right?
Mm.
Everyone OAuths in individually, so it's as if they did the action. So if Ross Belmont, deletes a lead using an MCP client, that action is attributed to Ross Belmont in the audit trail. Very simple. Um, Human in the loop for everything, um, based on how we're authenticating.
Fantastic. And that question was from Ashley. That I think I forgot to say. And next question is from Sally. Okay, so if we have two Salesforce orgs, and org A has Agentforce agent,
Mhm.
can it talk to org B with its hosted MCP server, or would we need MuleSoft in this case?
I think the what you may bump up against there is not anything specifically on the MuleSoft side, but the fact that the Agentforce MCP client um, will need to grow a little bit to include some of these capabilities. And there's some thinking that we could do about whether MCP is the most efficient way to do that, or whether there are other direct ways for an agent to cut across orgs. So TBD on that specific piece. There may be more efficient ways to solve that problem.
Okay, thank you for that. And then we have one more question from Gwen. Are there future plans to add an additional authentication method like OAuth as an alternative to entering consumer keys and secrets?
I don't think I understand the question, because it's definitely OAuth, right? It's specifically auth code, the auth code flow. Um, what you might be thinking about is dynamic client registration, right? Dynamic client registration gets you into a place where the client is not known to the org ahead of time, and the first time it approaches the org, uh, it is dynamically registered and obtains access. You're seeing that in B2C spaces. PayPal, for example, has an MCP server, like Stripe, Shopify, things like that, where there's not central administrative control, right? If I want my ChatGPT to access my PayPal account and access my PayPal balance, then there's no central admin that's going to govern that, right? So PayPal allows for um, dynamic client registration. We do not for the foreseeable future, because the admins of the world are going to want control over what AI apps are accessing their orgs. I'm not sure what the world looks like where an AI app asks for access to your org and it's just automatically granted without the administrator being comfortable with that. I do not foresee that as a feature anytime soon.
Okay, thank you for that, Rose. And sorry for my camera change, but my main camera switched off. Okay, so we don't have any more questions. Can I ask you a question myself?
Yeah.
I would like you to expand a little bit more on the resources
Mhm.
part that you share, because that's kind of difficult to understand for me.
Yeah.
And I would like to know, like, which kind of resources would you send to an MCP client? Is that something that you can build? You share these are like attachments, but is this
Mhm.
something that you can like build with Lightning Web Components, for instance? Or what kind of resources are you sharing? Can you share with an MCP client?
Yeah. Today, there's not anything that we're directly supporting besides that EY case. So let's take two separate sort of modes of thinking there, right? So if you take a look at the
Mhm.
MCP spec, you would get the impression that a resource is vaguely analogous to an attachment, but the attachment is defined on the server. So if I'm the user and I'm sitting in my chatbot experience, and whereas I might take a file from my desktop and add it into my prompt and attach it like I'm attaching something to an email, an MCP resource would be similar. Perhaps that resource lives on the server or is connected to the server in some way, and it's just identified by a URL. In that sense, the resource is just an identification that says there's something interesting located at this URL, and the client may grab it and use it in its processing in the event that that's relevant, right? So, okay, so that's an interesting idea. As we think about Salesforce, though, we have a bit of a scalability problem, right? Even if we think about, let's say, files in CRM, well, there would be many thousands of files in CRM, and the current UI experiences of the clients would have you just pick them one by one from a list. So that's not going to work, right? A flat list. There are some interesting ideas I've had where maybe if you defined a custom resource specifically to a file that you as the administrator were controlling, that might help provide something interesting to the client. But another problem that you have there is that the users at runtime have to select that manually. So if you've ever sent an email but forgot to add the attachment, it's the same problem. So that needs to be worked on, I feel like, from the MCP client side before that is more useful. What it's doing today, I mentioned this UI case, right? How that works is a little bit different, and since it's a developer audience, I'll talk about this for a minute, which is in a world where you're building an MCP app, and I use that term specifically because if you search for it, you'll see MCP apps as an extension to the standard. A tool call can return rich UI and thus have some interactive widgets in your chatbot experience, right? You may have seen that in ChatGPT recently. They had something where you would see a snippet of, let's say, a DoorDash order or Zillow, scheduling a visit to a house you want to buy, right? How that works is that the tool call response has a link to it. That the tool call response includes a URL. It's a link, but what it links to is the HTML and JavaScript that's going to define that widget, right? So in that sense, it's appropriate, right? When the client gets the response, it sees that there's sort of like structured data content, like, okay, this is the order from DoorDash, but it'll also see that link that says, oh, here's a linked resource. The linked resource happens to be HTML and JavaScript. It pulls that in and renders it so that you see that in your chatbot experience, right? That's not yet available to you as developers, right? But we are working on that internally first and foremost, because you'll see more of that to complement and extend what we've already got working in ChatGPT. That's how the ChatGPT integration works today in a way that shows those interactive widgets, right? You can query for an account and it shows you a little card that displays the account. You can get the account plan. You can see recent activities. You can see a calendar of events, right? That's all powered by this resource identified UI templates, right? So that's probably the first meaningful instantiation of that for the MCP clients. There have been some others that were interesting, but none that we've moved forward on quite yet due to the user experience problems on the client side of just having a single flat list to have to navigate. So I hope that helps. It is a little bit confusing. I'm looking for more in the future, and it's one of those things where we'd love to hear use cases where those sort of like file attachment style use cases might be relevant. And what we may be able to do is turn back to our partners like OpenAI and Anthropic and help bring it to the table and jointly, lobby to raise the tide for all boats and expand what MCP is possible, what's possible in MCP for everyone.
Okay, thank you for that great explanation. And of course, if you have use cases, you can post them in our developer community and tag Ross to share them. And there you can also post more follow-up questions for today's AMA. With that, we're going to finish the session. Thank you so much, Ross, for all your thoughtful answers. And thank you so much for all the people connected on LinkedIn and YouTube. We got really great questions today, and you really make these AMAs interesting and possible. Ross, any final words?
No, just thanks for all your interest. That's the lifeblood of a developer community is interested developers with compelling use cases. We'd love to see you at TDX to talk about this further. If not, we'll see you on Salesforce Plus, and keep an eye out for the rest of these announcements in this area.
Thank you. Bye-bye.